Same thing that got him into trouble with the feds. That was a couple of years ago in 2020. Do you remember that? Back then, the Department of Justice charged Bannon for collecting money from Trump supporters to build the wall on the southern border. Only the allegation was that that money raised did not go to the wall. It went to Bannon's pockets and also the pockets of the guys who were working with him. Those guys went down for that federal crime. But Bannon got a pardon before he even went on trial on the charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. And it wasn't just a little bit of money either. The Fed said that he stole more than $1 million from the fundraiser and used most of it to pay off credit cards and take personal trips. But as everybody knows, presidential pardons only work for federal cases. And the Manhattan DA, that is a state case, which means bad news for Bannon. And that's because the feds already did pretty much all of the work on this case. That was before Trump's pardon literally gave Bannon a get-out-of-jail-free card. And conventional wisdom says that the Biden DOJ, well, of course, it's probably going to be happy to share the case files with the Manhattan DA, right? Biden's DOJ, sure. But lest you think this is a political persecution, those files that Biden's DOJ is more than likely going to share, those files came from the Trump DOJ. Let me repeat it. Those files came from the Trump DOJ. The Trump DOJ did all the work, the federal investigation and the prosecution of Steve Bannon. Trump's DOJ. And I am not going to lie, I have kind of been wondering why Bannon's co-defendants haven't yet been sentenced. Seems like it's been ages, right? The two of them pleaded guilty like 5 months ago. And no, they did not get the same pardon that Donald Trump gave to Steve Bannon. They didn't get any pardon. But those two guys, Brian Kolfage and Andrew Badolato, they have suddenly become very, very interesting to me. I know I'm not the only one. Because when it comes time for them to hear their sentences in federal court, that's scheduled for December, they could get a break. You know, they could. They could get a break. If they play ball with New York's DA and they decide to testify against Steve Bannon, they could shave a whole lot of time off those federal sentences. You know, the sentences where you have to kind of serve the whole thing almost. You don't get good time in the federal lockup. AKA, they might just get the break that Donald Trump gave Steve Bannon but did not give to them. Think about how you'd feel. By the way, there's a third guy, too. And this gets interesting. His name's Timothy Shea. He is awaiting a whole new trial because in his first trial, there was a juror who said, I am not going to hear this evidence in this case. That juror called this whole thing a government witch hunt. That's the kind of thing that has a judge going, whoa, mistrial. Okay, this one's off. We'll do it again. So the retrial is being scheduled again. Don't know when it's going to be yet. But how are things looking for Steve Bannon on the eve of turning himself in? Lucky for me, his lawyer is here with me live tonight to sift through it all. David Schoen is a friend of the show. He also represented Donald J. Trump during his second impeachment. It's great to have you. What perfect timing, David. So do we know yet what charges are in the indictment? Any unsealing yet, or do you at least have a peek?
No, we really don't. It's a very odd situation. I have never really encountered a situation in which there was a sealed indictment, but one defendant is told that the indictment exists. Usually, an indictment's sealed, as you know, because there's some fear that a person who's a defendant in the case might flee. We know that there's more defendants than just Mr. Bannon. We don't know how many. We don't know anything about the charges. We expect that tomorrow a judge will order the indictment unsealed, and we'll know a lot more.
So the whole bit about, Steve Bannon, offering himself up voluntarily and coming in to enter a plea, it seems weird that we have that time frame when we don't even have charges yet. Is that inaccurate reporting that he's going to show up tomorrow to enter a plea?
A plea of not guilty. I mean, tomorrow is the day for him to be processed and have his arraignment, in which he'll be confronted with the indictment and he'll enter a plea of not guilty. This was set up several days ago. Since then, we've seen some leaks. Apparently, someone, and one would have to think from the prosecutor's office, leaked this story to the Washington Post But so we're getting our information from there, actually, other than the idea that he's to show up tomorrow, be processed, and then have the arraignment tomorrow.
If I were you, I'd be mad if I was reading about my client's case in the Washington Post before you get a chance to sort of see what's going on. As a lawyer, I'd be fuming. But you just mentioned that there's the rumor about the co-defendants. That tweaks my ear a little bit. Is it the same co-defendants from the federal case? Because you know how it works, David. If you have co-defendants, they are leverage, right? Every prosecutor, federal or state, will use that as leverage and say, have I got a deal for you? All you have to do is talk about that guy. Is that what you're, suggesting might be tomorrow?
We really don't know. What we do know is there's at least one other co-defendant. We don't know who it is. We don't know how many there are. You raised the interesting point earlier, that is about Mr. Colfage and Badalado. They were scheduled to be sentenced yesterday, and all of a sudden that sentence was moved until December, I think December 14th now. The other fellow, Shea, has his trial scheduled for October 29th, but he's trying to move it for December. He has moved for the disqualification of one of the prosecutors in the federal criminal case based on his allegations of misconduct in that case.
So you know that accepting a pardon, a federal pardon, a presidential pardon, that imputes guilt, right? That says, I acknowledge it. I will accept this pardon because I'm being pardoned for what I did. Not so much I'm being pardoned because I never did it. So is that going to be, a jujitsu here? Is that going to be a problem that will be brought up in state court that, look, Your Honor, this client or this defendant accepted a pardon, which means that he accepted guilt in this case already once. So why should we not assume it's guilt this time too?
No, that won't be an issue in the case. I'm confident, and I respectfully disagree with the premise. One is often given a pardon because the process is perceived as unfair, not because there's any finding of guilt or any admission of guilt whatsoever.
Well, then I think we're going to have to agree to disagree on that. You're way better at this stuff than I am, but I report on a lot of it. Oh, no, I will guarantee you, you have more degrees than a circle. I do not. But I have reported on a lot of these cases, David, where that is sort of an essential element of being pardoned. It means you're pardoned for what you did, not you're absolved of any guilt.
Well, that's both of those things are right. He's pardoned for what he did or what he was charged. He's pardoned for what he's charged with. It's not any absolution, but there's been no finding of guilt nor any admission of guilt with the pardon. And literally, pardon was given in this case in particular because of a perception that the process was simply unfair. I can tell you, for example, in Roger Stone's case, while he was found guilty, I can assure you that he doesn't ever concede that he was guilty, nor did the pardon in his case. He originally was commuted, sentence was commuted, and then he was pardoned. But he would, to this day, deny that he engaged in the conduct. And so Mr. Bannon is presumed innocent at all times, unless and until he's ever proven guilty.
But that's
never the case.
Is this practice? Your conversation with me tonight, is this practice for what you're going to have to litigate in court? Because right? The other side's going to bring it up and say, pardon me, pardon the pun. Do you think you're going to have to debate that?
Well, if it is, then I'll be well prepared because you'll be far more able than any prosecutor we're going to face, I'm sure. Better prepared and more able.
You're way too kind. You're a great guest. I'll tell you that. It makes it easy to interview. So the co-defendant thing, I'm going to go back to that for a minute because we don't know who the co-defendant, singular, or maybe there's more since the indictment's sealed. I don't know. But we don't know who that person or persons may be. But we do know who his former co-defendants were, right? And we do know they were probably steaming mad as dirt because they didn't get the pardon that Steve got. And they probably don't want to spend all that time in federal lockup. The feds stick to the sentence. You don't get a whole lot shaved off. A wee bit, maybe. But you pretty much do that hard time. And that's a really uncomfortable proposition. And if the feds say to, not the feds, pardon me, if the Manhattan DA says to these co-Ds, I'll make it easy on you, but you're going to tell me what you know, and you're going to be honest, and you're going to get up there on the stand, and you're going to swear and testify against him. Aren't you terribly worried about that?
Well, I'm not a big worrier, but I assume in every case that I enter that everyone is a potential witness against my client. I approach every case from a cross-examination standpoint. Some lawyers do it otherwise. My approach is to approach it from a cross-examination standpoint. I assume there will be witnesses, like I assume everyone out there is a potential witness. And I think you're 100% right. I think that the norm is, and frankly, we're seeing it potentially with this moved sentencing date. Although you could argue that's because the Shea case is still going on. But my assumption is when we see a sentencing date moved like that, they have been promised certain things, offered certain enticements, and threatened otherwise if they don't so-called cooperate with the government. But the idea that they should be angry because Mr. Bannon got a pardon and they didn't really belies what the facts in the case are. And I think that will all come out. You see what Mr. Bannon's role was in anything. I don't believe he did anything illegal at any time in connection with this matter, if this is what the charges are about.
Yeah, that's the anger part, and then there's the other part, which is the reality that's coming down the pike of how long you got to spend behind bars, and that is never fun. But I do understand it's also ripe for you to mine and question those two on the stand to say, did you discuss this with the prosecutors in the case? Have you been in any discussions with the prosecutors? Did they ever offer you leniency? Of course, they don't, but it's implied. Okay, so next question, and this is a bit lengthy, so bear with me as I kind of set it up. We went way back in the, the way back machine on video, and we grabbed a clip of Hillary Clinton from the Today Show back in January of 1998. And it was fascinating because it reminded me of something that Steve Bannon was talking about today. First, let me play the Hillary clip, and you'll know exactly why I'm playing it. And then I'm going to read Steve Bannon's statement today, so have a look at this.
But I believe that this is a battle. I mean, look at the very people who are involved in this. They have popped up in other settings. This is the great story here for anybody willing to find it and write about it and explain it, is this vast right-wing conspiracy that has been conspiring against my husband.
The vast right-wing conspiracy. I have never forgotten that. David, I've never forgotten the vast right-wing conspiracy in the prosecution of President Clinton and how Hillary Clinton portrayed that to Matt Lauer on the Today Show. Remember him? But then I saw the quote from Steve Bannon today, and I was really interested. Let me put it up on the screen for our viewers. First, he called the charges phony, and then he said, nothing more than a partisan political weaponization of the criminal justice system. He also said they are coming after all of us, not only President Trump and myself. I am never going to stop fighting. In fact, I have not yet begun to fight. They will have to kill me first. Boy, do I have a lot of questions about that. But I'll start with the first one. This whole conspiracy thing, I'm struggling with that one, only because it was the Trump DOJ that started this whole ball rolling in the first place. Don't you see how that just sounds kind of nutty, that the man who's Trump's brain is apparently the conspiracy against him?
I don't know. I think a lot of questions were raised during the Trump administration about the Trump DOJ, Mueller, Andrew Weissman, Christopher Steele, etc. I think there are a lot of people who feel very strongly, maybe half the country, that even the Trump Justice Department had folks in it who were very anti-Trump and out to get Trump and make sure Trump never held office again. I think Mr. Bannon's point would be here that he was indicted the last time in the federal case related to We Build the Wall, something like, end of August. So let's say 60 to 90 days before the 2020 election. And now all of a sudden, after all of this time, he's the guy out there, pushing MAGA candidates and all of that all around the country on a very popular podcast, maybe the most popular, and he's indicted again just before the midterm elections when he's been pushing very hard in the midterm elections. So I think that's what he means by, he perceives it as a hit job to really shut down Trump through him.
I get it. What you're saying, the people that you named, by the way, one of them appears regularly on MSNBC, which I think is very left-leaning. And he rarely says anything that gives further context as to how a different position might actually be legally acceptable or challengeable. But I also know that the Trump DOJ was headed by Jeff Sessions and Bill Barr, and those two guys backed him till the very end. Even Jeff Sessions was booted out and still had Trump's back. Bill Barr had his back until he released his book, but he's not in a position, at this point to levy charges against Donald Trump. So I'm still struggling. If people under Bill Barr or Jeff Sessions had these left-leaning tendencies, don't you think their ultimate boss would say, hell no, you are not going into a political prosecution of the president's right-hand man?
No, I don't think so. I think, first of all, there are strong feelings about Mr. Bannon within the administration one way or another. But no, I don't think that's the case at all. I mean, I think the facts really do bear out that during the Trump administration, we saw people who Mr. Mueller picked for his commission. They came out of the Justice Department. We saw this conduct by, Strzok and others in the Justice Department at that time. Those were very anti-Trump things. I don't know if we call them right-wing or not. We call them anti-Trump. I don't know if Bill Barr today, is right-wing, left-wing, but he certainly doesn't like Donald Trump and, would like to see him prosecuted or, something. Anyway, I don't know all of the motivations for all of the people. I think that Mr. Bannon's point has some validity to it.
So the last part of his statement where he said they're going to have to kill me first, I mean, that sounds pretty dramatic and like hyperbolic and frankly just silly. But is it true? I mean, your client. Does he mean that? Does he really mean that he's going to do a Waco or barricade himself or like they're going to have to kill me before they can prosecute me?
No, he doesn't think that. Two things. One, he is, a Navy man, so he's a tough guy and all that. But secondly, what he takes very, very seriously is that he's been what they call, swatted 3 times now in a short period of time in a very, very dangerous situation. He literally believes that in at least one of those cases, he was within seconds of being shot to death. So he thinks, there's something going on here that for a guy to be swatted 3 times. He does think that his life is literally at stake. And in terms of fighting, he means that he intends to clear his name, that he did nothing wrong whatsoever, and he's going to fight with everything he's got. But no, he's not going to pull a Waco or David Koresh in one of those situations.
Okay, or Ruby Ridge or any of that stuff, right?
Right.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure because, those statements, David, you got to get that client under control with his rhetoric, for heaven's sake.
Sure.
David Schoen, thank you so much for being on tonight. Really appreciate it. Look forward to the next time. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.